there are all kinds of ways that religion is leveraged to authorize male domination. So you've got stories of male heroes killing their mother, in this case, the serpent Tiamat, slain by the war hero Marduk. He makes her body into heaven and earth. And I don't think these are really cultural related, but a male warrior attacking a female serpent being. In Iceland, there's a lot of this. St. George and the Dragon. So there's this theme of there cannot be any female form of the divine, unless it's the Virgin Mary who's packed into a very narrow constraint, similar to that compass that we saw earlier. The divine must be male, and where people persisted in revering Mary or other female saints, you have iconoclastic movements to forbid the use of sacred icons, going right into the churches and knocking down images of the saints. This is in a Christian context. It happened to pagans too. You have women who belong to polytheistic systems, like the Phoenician princess Jezebel, who married King Ahab, an Israelite king in Samaria, and who eventually is thrown from the tower, called a whore. And this name of whoredom was very current at that time in Israel as a metaphor for straying to the false gods of other people. So it's a challenge to the monotheism. So there's this wrapping up of goddess veneration with whoredom, with female disobedience, and with the need for punishment. So all of these religious systems have ways in which women cannot operate toe-to-toe with men. So they are not allowed to be witnesses, or in this Talmudic quote, you need 100 women equal one male witness. In the Quran, then you've got two female witnesses equal to one male. And so there's forms of preference given to males. And of course, they are the judges, they are the lawmakers, they are the writers of literature, and so it's all in their power to define. And so we see these kinds of quotes from Confucius. Women produce order. It's nothing to do with warlords or cruel husbands or slave masters. Women are the source of all evil. And she's stupid and she's inferior. And so because of that, she needs to distrust herself and obey her husband. So these are religious precepts. And you have a woman, Ban Zhao, the most famous woman in Chinese literature up to a certain point. And she's making these same prescriptions. I mean, she basically, if she's going to be a scholar at all, she has to preach what is the reigning ideology. And so she's telling other women, be quiet, be chaste, be obedient, be shamed for yourself. And a husband is heaven. Heaven cannot be shirked. Nothing equals in importance the imperative duty of obedience. Imagine the implications of that in real life. What about your children? What is he telling you to do? What if he's raping your children? What then? That's not ever considered in these laws. So the prescription is wife will sacrifice herself so her husband will have well-being. She's going to sell her body so he can eat. And on the other hand, women are told that chastity is the most important imperative. And so it's better to starve in the wilderness than to sell your body. And so in these systems, the first wife, the second wife, the concubines, those other women in low on the pecking order are tragic. And lamentations by these women appear in poetry across much of Chinese literature. Women runaways, servant girls who ran away, were really common. And so you have texts who are offering, this is an astronomical number, 300 merits, for leading back to her home a woman or girl who has escaped. And so a female poet laments how sad it is to be a woman. Nothing on earth is held so cheap. We have women, again, prescribing, and this is in Kenya, in the Swahili coast, how the main duty is to please the husband, because he's the one who's going to determine when you die, whether you go to paradise or to the fire. So obey him. Ask his permission, please him, sit with your master, that you may meet with no loss in this world and the next. And you've got all these horrific punishments in hell that are being prescribed here in an Iranian context. Women hung by their hair, burning in hellfire, strung up by their tongues for scolding their husbands, or if they claimed their husbands had actually been the fathers of men, of children that other men sired, they would be hung by hooks in the fire from their breasts. So this is that use of fear to terrify women that this could happen to them. And yet we also have fire being used in India again, not just as a chastity test, but the idea that a woman is worthless without her husband, that she is like a feudal slave. Once he's gone, her life is worth nothing anymore. And so throwing herself on his funeral pyre became a prescribed behavior, a horrifying death. He's dead, she's alive. And so you see this already being prescribed in the Rig Veda. So that takes us back at least 25 centuries. And widows are supposed to step into the pyre without any affliction and well adorned. And so we see this being described in the Mahabharata for four of Krishna's wives. And then we'll see some of the Puranas that say that it's a Vedic requirement that the woman should immolate herself after the death of her husband. And there's references to this also from Greek travelers like Strabo. And then there's different distortions that arise because this particular character, Queen Tarabai Bhosle, did not immolate herself in her husband's cremation, but this comic book is claiming that she did. So you've got these norms being enforced at different levels outside of truth. There are memorials like this in Rajasthan, where a hand for each woman who immolated herself on her husband's funeral pyre. This was considered to be a highly honorable thing. She thereby became like the goddess Sati. And this is why the British referred to this custom as Sati. And so here's again is Sita in the chastity ordeal with the fire not burning her because she's so pure. So women, like with the Virgin Mary, are being held out an impossible standard to live to. You know, nobody's not going to be touched by the fire. But go to the Indo-Europeans, because we have Arab travel observing in Russia, actually Ukraine, that the Lord, upon his death, there would always be one concubine, a slave, who would be designated to be buried with him. And so they would get her drunk, the men would all rape her, and then she would be executed and interred along with her Lord. So this widow persecution, and we can see here the Proto-Indo-European root of the word means empty. It includes social exclusion, food deprivation, sometimes witchcraft accusations, being blamed for their husband's death, loss of possessions, being cast out, being demonized. So here, Taraka, a bride who went mad because her husband had died. And, you know, this is not unreasonable to think this might happen, because to be a widow was to be a living death, as proverb actually describes it. But here she becomes a demon who devours people. And so this is kind of similar to Rangda in the Balinese context, this terrible widow figure who everyone's aware of and abhors. And so widows are seen as inauspicious. They're a bad omen, and so nobody wants them at their marriage or any other festival. They have to stay off separately. They're supposed to fast and say mantras, and you know, someday they'll die and nobody will really notice because they're not part of society. There's also the problems of inheritance for a widow. In this case, we don't even know her name, the woman of Pultit, who the house that she helped build with her husband, when he died, as long as he was alive, no problem. But once he's dead, then his family moves in, his brothers take over the house because she's an outsider. She's not believed as a woman to have any right to the property. And so she was really reviled by the whole village as a crazy woman because she continued rights over the house. And so mourning practices for men and for women are very, very unbalanced. You'll have sometimes men can marry immediately after their wife dies. Sometimes women are either forced to wait years or never. In Papua New Guinea, some of the people, they require widows to wear a net with the man's bones, and they're also covered with ash. They're like living ghosts to honor his memory. We have the sacrifice of women. This is from a Moche pyramid in Peru. This is a warrior society. And they also sacrificed women in Mound 72 at Cahokia along the Mississippi River. Now, there's going to be a lot more about religion and patriarchy. I'm coming to the end of this show, and this is really sort of a break, in a sense, in time and space. But just to say that these patriarchal protocols are being enforced in Congress and very often by members who belong to the far-right religious fundamentalist movements. And so they're the ones in charge of laws about birth control and repression of all kinds of things that have to do with women's freedom. This also applies when we look at the massive scandal of child abuse, sexual abuse by priests, both of boys and girls, and the secrecy of the church hierarchy covering all this up and moving them around so they can go on to molest others because this shameful secret. Okay, one last section quickly. Exorcism, because this is another way of punishing women, but it has to do with the assumption that she is possessed by devils, and that's why she is behaving unsubmissively. And so we've got this exorcism chair with these spikes. Imagine what it would be like to sit on this thing. You know, a kind of torture chair, very reminiscent of the witches' chairs in Europe that were used as torture devices. And so here's two examples from China. I'm trying to find out more about these. Luck on that yet. But this idea that women are especially likely to be possessed by demons is especially current in Christianity, both the Catholic and the fundamentalist Protestant versions. And so you've got the priest needing to dominate the woman. He's taken his shawl and placed it around her neck. He's jerking her around with it. Sometimes he will stand on her body, forcing her to drink things. You've got the men restraining her. She's struggling. I forgot to change the title on that one. And so this kind of behavior, ripping off a woman's clothes, you find the fundamentalist ministers in modern Africa performing these kinds of exorcisms. You know, she symbolizes sexuality, wrongdoing, evil, and inferiority, and he symbolizes God's power and lordliness of manhood. And so you will have exorcists, and in this case it's a woman. This is in India. The brother-in-law is torturing this woman. He's actually got a pincer there. He's maybe tearing off her fingernails. And the exorcist woman is got her by the hair, and they're browbeating her into submission. So if she's a rebellious wife, if she's not obedient and she's not submissive, then the family interprets this as demonic possession, because that's the only way they understand a woman. You know, she's not a human being. Her role is just to be dominated. And this is what we also are seeing in the fundamentalist churches in the United States. Some of the Catholic exorcisms that have come back in Italy especially, and Germany from olden days. And so a lot of physical abuse is going on inside these churches, and also in some of the Islamic cults. This is in the United Kingdom. And, you know, this is public. This is being filmed. So he's got a microphone here. He's preaching at her and driving her to the ground. And this is supposed to be for her benefit and that of the community, but it's very strongly sexed. You never see the reverse woman, man.